Hey, Miss Bobby.
I'm guilty of doing this. I have to watch myself. You could be talking, I still want to do this.
Oh, I
You
don't.
know,
That doesn't bother me. I'm a toucher. I mean, it may bother some
but
people
if it's
too.
somebody else, you go listen for your phone.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I have to watch myself on that one.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. We're going to begin today with our daily devotion from our Fully Awake 365 devotional, which today is called Healthy Religion. But first, in order to prepare our hearts and open our minds, let's say together our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. All right, let's go straight to our affirmation of the day. It says, today, I set my intention to practice healthy religion. The hurt caused by my past religious experiences and expressions can serve to open my eyes to a bigger and better vision of the awesomeness of God and of me. If fear, shame, intolerance, and inflexibility have not produced a harvest of peace, joy, and love in my life, I am willing to let go of unhealthy thoughts and unhealthy religion. I have received new wine. I will not put it into an old wineskin. Today, I will begin the journey of creating a healthy religion, healthy mind, healthy thoughts, healthy body, and healthy relationships. Woo! Wow, okay, that was a lot. So the first line is going to give away which one of us wrote this, because as people know, I have not been in ministry. Well, I kind of have, but officially I have not been in ministry for 30 years, but my brother has. So he wrote today's devotion, and he says, in almost 30 years of ministry, I have heard countless stories of how positive and negative the effects of religion have been on many people's lives. I have encountered amazing stories of the beauty of worship and God's presence. Conversely, or as I always say, the other side of the coin, I have endured tearful accounts of condemnation and manipulation in the name of God. The tendency, so what he's saying is when this happens to you, if you have one of those bad or unpleasant experiences with religion, he says the tendency then is to buy it all if you've only had good experiences, or to reject it all if you've had negative experiences. He says so many people hold to the idea that it's either all true or it's all a lie. Okay, they cannot find the middle. In my study of all the major world religions, I have discovered profound truth and also uncovered ridiculous fallacies. I have been overwhelmed with timeless wisdom and been shocked by cultural craziness. There is an old saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Seek to find a healthy balance where you are open to the truth contained in religion, but also vigilant and watchful not to be deceived by man's devising. Okay, so that was my brother's take on what healthy religion is, which is much like my own experience. We both went through a period in our lives when we realized that the religion we were brought up in and that was taught to us, the way it was taught to us, the exact way it was taught to us, was not working for us. So we both went exploring into other religions and life philosophies, trying to find the truth. And here's the conclusion that we both came to. There is no one religion or concept or practice or philosophy that is the one and only truth. All of them contain parts that are true and, frankly, parts that are a little and sometimes a lot crazy. And the crazy parts are always where man has intervened and thought that he needed to help God out by putting his 2 cents in, as it were. The example that we often give is that God gave Moses 10 commandments, and by the time he and the other religious leaders of his day got finished, it had turned into over 600 rules and regulations that people were expected to adhere to if they didn't want to be called an abomination in God's sight. And Then by the time Jesus came along, hundreds and hundreds of years later, the law had become so complicated and unwieldy and hard to follow that Jesus said, look, I'm going to make it real easy for you. I'm going to simplify all of this. There are only 2 commandments that matter. Number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. And number 2, love your neighbor as you love yourself. On these 2, he said, hang all of the law and the prophets. So it's interesting that both of those commandments, which Jesus himself told us were the only ones we really needed to follow, have to do with love. Because here's what Jesus knew. If everyone would just live their lives according to those 2 commandments, those 2 laws, then there wouldn't be any need for any of the others. So we're going to say the prayer for today together in a moment, and there's a line in it that asks God to help us figure out what part of religion, of any religion, is healthy for us and which part is harmful. And all religions have both. It's our job to be able to distinguish between the 2. It's what we call rightly dividing. And that's also what we're going to be talking about in today's teaching. A big hint is you can tell if something is healthy or not by whether or not it is based on love. If there's any part of a religion that's not based on love and showing love to others and acting in a loving way to yourself or to others, then it's not healthy. That's just a good rule of thumb that Jesus himself set as the precedent. So let's end this devotion time this morning by reading our prayer together. Eternal God, today I purpose in my heart to practice healthy religion. I have been helped and hurt by religion. My soul is thirsty for a path that cultivates a spiritual awakening and an ever-expanding consciousness. Grant me the wisdom to receive what is healthy for me and bless me with discernment to know what is harmful. Amen. All right, so before that is the end of the devotion. If the people online are leaving then, if you're staying with us, welcome. Today is a very special day. It is Miss Vicki Mullen's birthday. Yay! Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Vicki. Happy birthday to you. And she herself, and many more. Bruce added that. Thank you. She made a cake and brought it, and I'm sure it is delicious. I'm going to have a piece after the fact. It's back in the back if you want to enjoy it. So happy birthday, Miss Vicki. We're so pleased and happy and honored that you are sharing your birthday today with us here at Connection. Okay, so building on that theme of healthy religion, we're going to talk about exactly what healthy religion is and what it's not, and how you can tell, and what is the best way to practice a healthy religion. First, we're going to break it down into smaller individual parts and talk about health in general and how keeping our physical bodies healthy is connected to and part of our spirituality. For this, we're going to go to a man named Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is a specialist in a field that is fairly new that's called epigenetics, and he is one of the pioneers of what we now call quantum physics. So the title that was given on the YouTube interview with him is Your Beliefs Change Your Body. He begins by talking about how our bodies work at the cellular level. He says amoebas, which are these tiny little one-celled organisms that live out in nature, for example, in a pond. He said they survive by reading the environment that they're in through these little antenna-like receptors, okay? And then they adjust their behavior in order to better adapt to whatever environment they're in. So we also have cells in our bodies that would be comparable in structure and in function to these little amoebas. So the question is, how do these cells inside our bodies read the outside environment around them? They're inside our body. They don't really have access to the outside environment to know how they need to adjust and adapt in order to survive. So the brain is what signals or sends signals to these receptors on the cells, and the brain then becomes the interpreter of the outside environment for the cells. Now, time out. Let's give a little context with a comparison. So say you go to a country where you do not speak the language that is spoken there. You're going to need an interpreter, all right? Either a person or a device, an app on your phone, or some kind of book that'll translate for you. And your ability to understand what other people are saying to you, or for them to understand what you're saying to them, all depends on the proficiency of the interpreter. Let's don't rely on the app or the book. Let's say that you have a personal person that's there that's your interpreter. So if you say something, whether or not it's going to be understood by the other person, the way you said it is all in the hands of that interpreter, how accurately he or she interprets what you're saying. If you come across an interpreter for whatever reason that has bad motives or just an evil streak and wants to start some trouble, he could completely misinterpret what you're saying on purpose and make it sound like you're saying something that you're not. My point is, what you say, how what you say gets interpreted makes all the difference. So what's coming from your brain, the interpreter of information for your body from the outside environment, how the brain interprets it and then communicates it to your cells makes all the difference in how your cells inside your body function. All right. So if the messages it's sending are off or incorrect, it can make a huge difference in your health. Okay, back to Dr. Bruce. He says 2 people can receive the exact same information from their outside environment, but depending on how their brains interpret it, they can send totally different signals to their cells. Just like an interpreter can say anything he wants, okay? He can say to the person you're talking to, he said he loves you. Or he can say, he said he wants to kill you. Now, those 2 different messages are going to elicit very different responses from the person you're talking to. And then he gives an example. He says, my liver cells have no way of knowing what's going on in the environment except through the signals my brain sends. Okay, so just like I have no idea what somebody that's speaking a different language is saying to me until it goes through the interpreter. And if my liver cells are receiving signals that have been interpreted through a brain that's filled with fear, what they hear is, get ready for fight or flight. And a bunch of stress hormones are going to be released that my liver cells then have to deal with. But there might be a person sitting right next to me who is receiving the exact same information from the outside environment, whose brain interprets it totally differently and sends the cells the signal, it's going to be okay, which releases healing hormones. So 2 people in the same environment can send 2 completely different messages to their cells depending on how the brain is processing and interpreting information, and their cells will react, adapt, and adjust totally differently. So at this point, the man who is interviewing Dr. Bruce Lipton gives another example to make it a little clearer. He said, I am deathly afraid of snakes. I always have been. So my reaction, if I come across a snake out in nature, is going to be totally different from the reaction of a herpetologist, which is somebody who studies snakes. I would immediately go into fight or flight, and my system would be flooded with stress. Whereas the herpetologist's brain would interpret that information completely differently. A herpetologist could look at the snake and immediately be able to tell if it was poisonous or not. If it's not poisonous, he might even go and pick it up because he would have no fear attached to the information. And if it were poisonous, he would also probably know how to handle the situation much better than I would because his interpretation and life experience in that area would be totally different from mine. The responses from myself and the herpetologist would result in 2 completely different behaviors. So then Bruce Lipton interrupts and starts talking again, and he says, same signal, different interpretations, and thus different responses. How we interpret signals is learned behavior. Somewhere along the line, one of these people learned to be afraid of snakes, and one learned not to be. All right. So how do we learn behaviors? Bruce Lipton continues by saying that all of our cells have genes. And we used to think that the genes in our bodies were read only, which means that we used to think, okay, if you have this particular gene that's been passed down from your parents, then you are going to have this certain condition and there's nothing you can do about it. But now, thanks to this field he has started called epigenetics, we understand that we have the ability to rewrite our genes. We can actually alter them. He then gives the example of our brains being like computers. Computers aren't really useful to us, and they can't really do any work until we download programs onto them. So for the first 7 years of every human child's life, that's all they're doing. They're downloading programs through observing the behavior of those around them and through the interactions that they have with those around them. Which is why he said that for millennia now, the Catholic Church has said, if you give us a child from birth to 7 years old, they'll be a Catholic for life. Now, I don't know how true that is, but they understood that principle that if you download certain programs into a child for the first 7 years, those programs are already going to be in there and they will stay there until and unless the person decides to do something about them. Okay, so I know this has been a lot of technical information, but I'm getting to a point, I promise. We're talking today about healthy religion or a healthy spiritual practice or framework. So how do we know what's good for us and what's harmful? Well, knowledge is power. When you become aware of something, you can deal with it and interpret it correctly. You can't change or adjust things if you're not aware of them. And he's about to drop some important and very helpful knowledge on us here. He says most of the programs, in fact, up to 60% of them, we as humans have downloaded are programs that take away our power. They limit us rather than expand us. Many of them later in life resulting in self-sabotaging behavior. And these programs control our lives 95% of the time. So time out. We've talked about this before. If we're not living consciously, if we're not making decisions on purpose, if we're not being mindful, then our subconscious programs, which is what he's talking about here, 60% of which, according to his studies, are disempowering, which translates into harmful to us, they are what's running the show 95% of the time, unless we decide to consciously change them. And we're going to talk about how we do that a little later on. I just want to share a little bit more of his interview first. He says, after the age of 7, 95% of our behavior is no longer being driven by our creative, conscious mind. That's the part of our mind that holds our wishes and desires. See, children are really, under 7, are really good at wishes and desires. But after that age, we start losing our connection with that part of our consciousness. So when you become an adult, or at any point after age 7, if someone asks you what you want from life, you can tell them, and many of us want the same things: happiness, good health, loving relationships, the ability to earn a good living and take care of ourselves. But 60% of the mechanism we use to manifest those things is cluttered up with disempowering programs we downloaded during our first 7 years, which are running things 95% of the time unless we do something to change that. Using our conscious mind is like steering a car. If we're driving consciously, we can steer toward our wishes and desires. Our conscious creative mind is what helps us to manifest those things that we want in life. But if we're not paying attention, then our subconscious programs, which more than half, from what he said, 60%, are disempowering and self-sabotage. That's a hard word to say for me today. Sabotaging. So if we're not paying attention, then those programs will take the wheel and steer us in a different direction entirely. And a lot of the time, we don't even understand why we're going in the direction we're going in. Wow. So that is some important information. So how do we change or adjust the program so that we can interpret the information that's coming to us from the outside environment in a way that's most advantageous to us. What is it we need to be paying attention to in order to make the necessary adjustments in our behavior to keep ourselves healthy? And we're shifting now from physical health, like we were talking about earlier with our cells, to spiritual health. But as we know, it's all connected and everything influences everything else. The healthier we are emotionally, mentally, spiritually, then the healthier we're going to be physically. All right, before we get to what we should be paying attention to, we're going to go down one more little side road, but it is a very important one. When we have wishes and desires that don't manifest or are not manifesting, we want to know why. We start looking for reasons why it's not happening. And often, instead of looking inside ourselves, we begin to blame other people or institutions or conditions we've been exposed to. We say, I haven't been able to achieve my wishes and dreams for my life because I'm a victim of this person or of this traumatic event in my life or of this circumstance that was caused by someone else, some entity outside myself, rather than recognizing it was your own unconscious behavior and subconscious programming that controls 95% of your behavior that created whatever situation you are finding yourself in. Now, not understanding this is the most disempowering thing we can do to ourselves. He says, you're trying to change the outside world and bend it to your wishes and desires when it's your own behavior that's sabotaging all your efforts to manifest the things you want. All your efforts are unsuccessful when you refuse to see your programs, okay? When you refuse to be aware that you have them. How do you know what your programs are? Look at your life. It is a printout of your programs. Understand that the things you struggle with are not because anything outside of you is preventing you from getting to where you want to be. It's your own, sometimes invisible to you, programming. That's where the sabotage comes from, and yet you want to blame everyone and everything on the outside and think you are just the recipient of all this without recognizing you are the creator of everything you perceive to be happening to you. And then he looks directly into the camera and he gets very serious. And he says, listen, quantum physics is the most valid science on this planet. And principle number 1 of quantum physics says consciousness is creating our life experience. You want to change your life? You don't change the world outside you. You change your own consciousness and then watch the world around you change. Okay, so as I said, that was some powerful knowledge right there. And it's going to help us now as we begin to look at how we change our own consciousness so that we'll be able to live more mindfully, more on purpose, and less driven by our unconscious or subconscious programs, which puts us in a better position to be able to discern what spiritual practices and religious frameworks are healthy for us and which are harmful. The thing that needs to change is our interpretation of the information coming to us from our environment, because that interpretation is what sends signals to our spiritual cells, as it were, or of either health and well-being. Okay, so what we choose to be our religious framework can either send our spiritual cells messages of everything's going to be okay, just like he was talking about the liver cells, or they send our spiritual cells messages of dysfunction and fear. So for this, we're going to go to Esther Hicks. We seem to be going to her quite a lot lately. I know that I talked about her last week, and then my brother spoke about some of her teachings on Sunday. So God bless Esther Hicks. We're really resonating with her right now. The particular talk of hers I want to share portions of with you now is called Letting Your Inner Being Guide You to the Magic You Seek. And don't let that word magic make you afraid. It's not any hocus pocus or somebody putting a spell on you. Magic is it's the same thing we refer to as miracles. Okay, so it's another way of saying what Bruce Lipton was saying. He refers to it as our wishes and our desires. And so our question is, how do we go about changing our programming so that our brain interprets information in a way that is healthy rather than harmful? Or we could also say in a way that is conscious and mindful rather than unconscious. Now, before I even get into this, I'm going to go ahead and say some of you, maybe all of you, might find yourselves disagreeing with one of her basic premises, because most of us have been programmed to believe things like hard work pays off, or no pain, no gain. Where there is no struggle, there is no progress. That's too good to be true. Be suspicious of things that come to you too easily. Don't look at, some stuff like that. You don't appreciate things that you don't have to work hard for, etc., etc. So that's been the basic programming for most of us, all of which flies in the face of her premise, which is what we're going to talk about now, the path of least resistance. Now, the minute I say that, I bet some of you had an automatic emotional response that was something to the effect of, well, that's just lazy. Or that's just taking the easy way out. But this is my question to you. Who says the hard way is better? Why do we believe that? Down in your heart of hearts, if you are being honest with yourself, don't you pretty much want things to be easy rather than hard? Don't you love it when things are just easy and there's no stress? So look at the word it comes from, ease. We say that's one of the things we want to do. Well, ease and easy come from the same root word. So there's nothing inherently wrong with things that are easy. Wouldn't you rather live in and move with ease as opposed to conflict and struggle? That's a no-brainer for me. I'm going to choose easy every time. It's like you're trying to go, it's like you're walking in a creek and there's all these beautiful stepping stones and maybe a log across it. But you insist on getting down on the creek bed and slogging against the current, trying to get up there, rather than just hopping up onto the stones and walking right over the water. I was talking on the phone yesterday with my cousin, Bishop Jim Earl Swilley, and he was reminiscing about a time in his life when he decided to stop arguing with people about whether or not hell was real. In the sense of, now I know there are hellish things we go through, but hell in the sense of an eternal torture chamber that God will send you to if you don't believe in Jesus. So we were laughing because I was remembering one of the sermons of his I had listened to where he said, fine, if you just have to have a hell, I don't care, hell it up. And so that's what I say to you. If you just have a burning need for struggle in your life and doing things the hard way, then fine, struggle it up, wear yourself out. But there is a different way. And in my opinion, it is a better way. Let's see what Esther has to say about it. And how this relates to what we're talking about today is that it's not the only way, I'm sure, but it is one way to change your own consciousness, like we've been talking about. She says the path of least resistance is the path that your inner being, we talked a little bit about that last week, is calling you to, where you have the least resistant thoughts and can follow along most easily. In other words, it's the path of your least resistant thoughts. And there's a big hint. This is the way we change our consciousness, through our thoughts. Now, time out. Let's go back to what Bruce Lipton was saying about how our brain interprets information. What feels more resistance or creates more resistance? A fearful thought or a thought that's full of ease? What calls to you or draws you to it most? A happy thought or a sad thought? An angry thought or a forgiving, gracious thought? Doesn't it feel good to forgive somebody? I don't care how mad you've been at them. When that quality of forgiveness rushes into your body for them, doesn't it just feel so much better? Isn't it easier? Okay, we spend so much energy hanging on to our grudges. And they did this and I'm never going to forget it. But, I mean, think about even what that does to your body. Isn't it just so much easier and better to go, I forgive you. Let's be friends again. I love you. I've done the same thing. All right, I got way off track there. So Esther Hicks says, look at it this way. Your inner being knows where you are in relation to where you'd like to be. It is aware of how close or how far away your reality is from your wishes and desires. And it also knows what the least resistant path between the two is, and is offering to you all day, every day, satisfying thoughts to lead you along the path. In other words, that's what your inner being is doing. It's putting those little stones in the creek for you. The path of least resistance is the one you feel most satisfied on. When you, in any moment in time, are feeling satisfied, then that's a very good indicator that you are flowing in the same direction as your inner being. Okay, remember last week, or maybe the week before, we talked about this, that the only time you feel negative emotions is when you are not thinking about or afraid. Your inner being is never offended. Back to Esther. When you're feeling satisfied, then your lower self or ego self is not in the way and is not offering any resistance. So therefore, there is no feeling of inner conflict. But if you are standing in an attitude of dissatisfaction, if you're complaining about what is and wishing it were different, then you're holding yourself away from or outside of the path of least resistance that runs from where you are to where you want to be. Okay, thank you, Esther Hicks. That is the end of the information from her. So let's start wrapping this up by tying all the pieces together that we've talked about today. We began with our devotion, which was about healthy religion. And we said that all religions contain certain aspects that are helpful and healthy, as well as aspects that can be harmful. And those aspects usually come about when man has inserted his thoughts and ideas into it and created a bunch of rituals and dogma that God could really care less about, just like the people in Moses' day turning the original 10 Commandments into over 600 Levitical laws. And what was the solution to that? So let's go back and see what the solution to that was. The solution was when Jesus came and said, look, all these laws are way too complicated and hard to follow. This is all you need to do. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself, which, as we've talked about, includes loving yourself first. So now we've established that the basis of a healthy religion or a spiritual practice must be love. Being in a state of unconditional love for God, for yourself, and for others is the healthiest way to live. And whatever aspect of any religion or spiritual practice that gets you there is what you should be aiming for. And how you can tell, how can you tell when you're in that state? Because it feels good, okay? Your emotions are your indicators. Anyone who's truly honest with themselves will tell you, like I just said, loving others feels better than hating them. And that emotions like joy and peace and ease and satisfaction feel better even in your body, like emotions of fear and jealousy and anger. And if and when you ever find that negative emotions are somehow feeling better to you, then understand that's a program that got downloaded into your brain somewhere along the way that is faulty and needs to be adjusted, because these emotions, those kind of emotions, are never emanating from your higher self. And ultimately, they will not lead you to your wishes and desires, even if they feel good momentarily, and even if you think you can justify them. Those are the emotions that always lead to struggle and inner conflict and dis-ease, which can turn into physical disease. So how do we change the programs? As Bruce Lipton said, we run into trouble when we aren't paying attention. But what is it we must pay attention to? How we feel. Because how we're feeling is the biggest and best indicator of whether or not we are in alignment with our inner being, with our higher self, which is our divine nature. It is that part of God that is in us. And when we find we're not feeling good, how do we get to a place where we are? We reach for the happiest thoughts we can find in the moment, and we focus on them exclusively. That's the way we shift our consciousness from the inside out. as Bruce Lipton was suggesting. It's our programming that causes us to blame others for where we are or where we are not in our life. And it's that same programming, as he said, that causes our brain to interpret things through either a lens of fear or through the lens of love and a general sense of well-being, like it's going to be okay. Which of those lenses we choose to see things through affects whether we are healthy or sick, both physically and spiritually. The same principle works on both levels. Basically, then, it boils down to this. Any aspect of any religion that would cause you to interpret things through a lens that makes you feel bad, that makes you feel guilty, that makes you feel sinful, that makes you feel inadequate, that values struggle because somehow struggle, they taught you that struggle is more holy than getting things easily. Okay, so that's not healthy. That's how you can tell that's not a healthy aspect of a religion. If it's not good news, it's not the gospel. That's what gospel means. Bottom line, if it doesn't make you feel good, it's not healthy for you because love always feels good. That's it. Love always feels good. And that's how you know. Healthy people feel good. Unhealthy people feel bad. It's really that simple. So seek out those things, people, and situations as much of the time as you can that make you feel good. And stay away from those that make you feel bad. You'll be a much healthier person if you learn to do that. Easy enough? Okay. I want to end with a story that Bruce Lipton told at the end of his interview. And I don't know whether his father died or his parents got divorced. He didn't say. All he said was that his mom had remarried in her later life a man who became his stepfather. And he was what he referred to as a curmudgeonly old man. He said he was never happy. He rarely smiled. He was always serious and complaining and cranky. And at the end of his life, he was in and out of consciousness for about a week. And so Bruce was over with his mother, helping her care for her husband as he was dying. And he said that 2 days before he died, he opened his eyes and he had a few moments of clarity, as people often do right before they go. And the man looked at his wife with a kind of sad look on his face and he said, "I didn't have any fun." And Bruce said, he said to himself in that moment, "That will never be me." He said, "At the end of my life, I'm going to say, I had such a good time. I want to go back and do it again." Now, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, whether or not you believe we come back, whether or not you even believe in the law of attraction as Esther Hicks teaches it, whether or not you believe that thoughts become things and that we can actually create our own reality, doesn't matter. Even if you don't believe any of that, wouldn't you rather spend the time you have here being happy rather than being sad and focusing more on the good than on the bad? Wouldn't that be a better way to live? What have you got to lose? Give it a shot. That's what I try to do every single day. So we're going to stand now and sing our song. My mom is not here this morning, but we're gonna do it a cappella. Okay, I love this song. I love that we're ending every service with this because it says everything in this song. Okay, let's see how we can pitch this. Let's see. Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. If you're joining us online, join us again tomorrow night at 6:30 for our continuing study series on Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. Then Friday morning, 7 a.m., we'll be on Zoom for our devotional, and then we will see you Sunday, either online or in person at church. I love you. Be at peace. Have a wonderful week.